Hello and welcome to this week's edition of 50 Years Serving the Island, a series of programmes showcasing highlights from Manx Radio's archives during the station's first 5 decades serving the public in the Isle of Man. In 1968, Manx Radio was transferred into public ownership and became the island's public service broadcaster. Today we go back to 1981 and join David Callister for an edition of the Family Phone-In with special guest Mona Douglas.
The family phone-in topic for this morning is old-fashioned health remedies. We don't want you talking about the over-the-counter chemist prescriptions today. We want you to tell us about the things that your mums and dads and grandmas and granddads did to keep you well. And with me in the studio to talk about them, and indeed to start the programme off, I'm very, very pleased to welcome back again to Manx Radio Miss Mona Douglas, who is an eminent writer. She also collects information on the Isle of Man. She's a musicologist here, and she's back on the show this morning. Good morning to you, Mona.
Good morning.
Well, now, you've done a little bit of research into some of these old cures, and I think I stopped you in your tracks this morning when I said there was a fella who put a cork in his bed to cure cramp. You'd never heard of that one?
No, I haven't. I've heard of putting a nutmeg in your pocket to cure rheumatism.
Yes, that's
which is more or less the same type of thing.
I wonder if anybody knows how on earth these things work, because I can't see any connection between rheumatism and a nutmeg whatsoever, can you?
Well, nutmeg is, as we all know, a spice, and it has certain effluvia, and it might be something to do with that, I don't know.
But Mona, now from your notes, what researches have you found in the Isle of Man? You've come up with some rather extraordinary things, haven't you, really?
Well, unusual, say, anyway. Now, a great thing in the island in the old days, of course, used to be the fairy doctors. They weren't fairies, of course. They were people who cured by charms, and they were nearly always men. Some of the women folk used to cure by herbal mixtures and that kind of thing, but they were nearly always accompanied by some spoken words as well. And the men seem to have specialised in these spoken charms also with something touching or something like that with the hand. And a great many of them were very well known, especially for curing animals, but also some of them for curing people.
But these old charms are quite extraordinary. Are they going to pass out? Are people going to forget all these? Is it going to be lost, do you think?
Well, I don't think they'll be lost. A good many of them have been recorded in various books on folklore that are published and available, and also a good many of them are still practiced to some extent.
Has anyone ever charmed anything for you at all?
Yes, I have had a wound charmed by a blood stopper. Of course, they were very well known, and they were nearly always men.
Yeah.
Now, this particular man that I'm thinking about was at one time skipper of the Sarah Blanche. Do you remember the Sarah Blanche, a little cargo steamer that used to... I think she belonged to the packet company at one time, and then she was taken over by somebody else.
I don't remember.
But this man, he lived in Douglas. I think he was a peel man, really, but he lived in Douglas. He worked for the packet company before he got the command of the Sarah Blanche, and I've often heard about people coming down to wait for the boat to come in to get Tom to go and stop blood from somebody that was very badly bleeding.
Tell me what happened when this... Were you young at the time, or...?
Oh, yes, I was just a child.
Can you remember exactly what happened? What did he do? Did he just say these words and it stopped bleeding? Or?
Well, it was in my arm. I must have cut an artery or something, because it was a pretty bad bleeding. And he stroked the arm and said something in Manx, and it gradually ceased. And then they put a bandage on and it healed up normally.
So did belief in what he was doing, it didn't enter into it in your case then?
No, I was just told to give him my arm, and I did, and this is what happened.
Yes.
And I didn't understand the Manx at that time. I expect it was what they usually said, on Sena Manera as a back as a spirit knew, but I wasn't well enough up in Manx at that time to understand it.
Have you ever tried to do any charms yourself? Or do you have to have certain gifts to be a charmer?
Well, for the blood stopping, it was always said that the charm must only be passed on from a man to a woman or from a woman to a man, and it must be within the same family. I personally have never had one.
No. We have our caller starting, and we have on line one, I think it's either Lita or Rita. Hello?
Hello?
Lisa, good morning to you.
My nana goes to bed and she puts a magnet in to cure rheumatism.
A magnet?
Yes.
How long has she been doing that?
She's been doing it for quite a while now because she fell over and she's had a lot of trouble with the leg a few years ago.
Yeah.
And now she just always uses a magnet and it really works.
It really works, does it?
Yeah.
Mona, have you ever heard of that, putting a magnet in your bed?
No, I never have, but I should think it's in the line with the nutmeg.
Yes. Right. Well, do you think if you ever get rheumatism, you'll stick a magnet in your bed?
All right.
Thank you very much for calling.
Bye.
With us now is Len.
Talking about these charms, and Mona Douglas was saying that they were dying out, or you were asking to see, did they think they were dying out? Well, I'm only a young fella, but I can manage to charm warts.
Now, right, let's get on to charming warts. You know a bit about this, Mona, do you, charming warts?
Well, yes, it's quite a well-known thing, of course. Nan Wade, I believe, was particularly good at it, but there were lots of other people that could do it too. Curiously enough, some of the English people have come into contact with this, the people that have come over. I happened to have at my house yesterday, when I was talking about some of these cures, an Englishman who has only been in the island about a year. He had tried some advertised cures for warts, chemical things, and they hadn't had any effect. And there was a child there who said to him, I know a cure for warts. If you tie a human hair round the wart and say the right words, it'll go. So he let the child try it, and sure enough, the wart went.
Well, is this any part of your charming of warts, tying human hairs round, Len?
No, I use a potato.
A potato? Tell us
Oh
how
yes,
you
I've
did.
heard of that.
Tell us how you did. Can you tell us?
Well, you're not supposed to.
Oh, you're not. I see. Oh, if it's a medical secret, we don't.
Yes, it's a medical secret, yeah. Also, my father-in-law, he was a blood stopper. He had the charm. He didn't use anything. He didn't even need to go out of the house. He just had to go in the house and tell them that somebody was bleeding bad or an animal was bleeding bad. And he'd just go off to his room on his own, and the bleeding would stop at the same time as he was in the room.
What did he say?
I've no idea.
Did anybody ever sort of wonder how these gifts came about?
Well, I often do myself, like. You know, how
You've no explanation for it at all?
No, because I've had people try the same cure as me for warts, and it hasn't worked.
Yeah. Do you cure anything else other than warts?
No, just warts.
You're the wart man, right. Are warts still as prevalent today as they used to be in the 30s and 40s?
Oh, I would say so.
Do you get emergency calls out for warts at all, then? No?
Not emergency calls, but
Often.
The worst case I had was a chap he'd been going to hospital and getting them cut out, and they kept coming back on him. And he came to me in desperation, He was covered in warts. I've never seen the like.
Really?
No. And I managed to cure him.
He must be pretty good at it then.
But he was the worst case that I have done. I've done quite a number.
How long do the warts take to disappear after you say your charm?
Various times, but usually within 2 months they're gone.
Yeah? 2 months.
And the thing is, there's no mark left where they've been.
Do you find cases where they sort of come back to these people, or are they gone forever?
Not yet. I haven't found any that's come
Very
back
good.
yet.
Well, you've got a 100% success rate by the sound of things.
So far.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for calling us. Most interesting that, Lenny, thank you.
Right, thanks very much.
Bye-bye. We move on now. Are you there, Peggy?
Hello. Well, I just wanted to say, when I was young, I had warts on my hands and a very bad one on my knee, which I used to tear every time I used to, clean a floor or catch it in anything. But it wouldn't tear right off, but almost. And I was told to rub a slug on it and put it in a matchbox and bury it and not tell anybody where I'd done it, what I just did do.
Yeah.
And they all disappeared.
Mono, any comments on rubbing a slug on your knee?
No, I haven't heard of that one.
Well, it works for me.
Yeah, I've heard that somewhere. It's all coming back to me now. Did it take a bit of courage to go and pick this slug up?
It did, because I hate them.
Would you do that, Mona, if you had a wart on your knee?
Oh, yes, doesn't worry me to pick a slug up.
And have you ever been troubled with warts?
I've never seen another wart in my life since. No, it was a marvellous cure.
So you're a friend to the slugs anyway?
Well, yeah, as far as regards to that. Otherwise, I'd put slug pellets out.
You don't? What, after them doing that for you? Dear, oh dear. Anyway, thanks, Peggy, for calling us.
Right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
We move on now to our next caller, who's Linda. Hello, good morning.
Hello. I used to suffer with styes a lot when I was a little girl, and my mother used to have a wedding ring and make a little sign on my eye, and it used to go.
With her wedding ring?
Yes, with her wedding ring, make a little sign on her eye, on my eye, and it would go.
What sort of sign? How do you mean?
Well, I don't know. It just used to rub it, and her own little special sign, and it would go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, has anybody else heard of that?
Has anybody else?
Oh, yes,
Yes,
I've
Mona?
heard about that too.
Yeah.
Where do you think that might originate, Mona? Any idea of that? Has it got sort of religious significance?
I don't know. Do you know whether anything was said while she was rubbing the eye with the ring?
No, not at all. She just used to make a little sign of her own. I used to say to her, what are you doing, Mum? She said, oh, just my own. It was passed down from her mother, you see.
Oh, yes, I expect the sign would be the sign of the cross.
Well, I
Yes.
suppose it was, yeah.
Yes.
But they used to go, you know.
Yes, oh yes, I think these things did work. Just why, I don't know.
Yes, yeah. She was a great believer in the old folklore. Yes.
Did this sort of sty disappear very quickly then? Or?
Oh, well, it'd be the next day. It'd be gone.
Yeah,
you know.
It's the same as the old wart.
Yes.
That's right. Yes.
And another thing that they used to do for that, they used to pluck a leaf of the mare dunyamaru, that's the wild sage, and rub that round the eye while saying the words.
I see. Yes. Thanks anyway.
Again, it's a charm that's involved, really, is it?
Yes,
Did
it's
she
both. It's the charm and the rubbing, I
Yeah.
think.
Did your mother say any words over this or not?
No, not at all. She just used to make a little sign with her wedding ring, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for letting us know about it.
Okay, then.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You have a theory, I think, Mona, that behind a lot of this sort of superstitious angle of this, is a sort of religious background anyway.
Well, I think the whole business of what we now call superstition is a survival or a relic of the early religions, which have altered and some people would say deteriorated over the centuries. They were, first of all, I suppose, the pagan religions, the Druids and their predecessors, and then it was taken on into Christianity. And, of course, you've got to remember that both the priests of the older religions and the Christian monks made a speciality of treating people. They were the first doctors, and they used to grow herbs for medicinal purposes. And, of course, that tradition has gone on. It's probably been filtered out among the people. People would find out what they use for certain things and use them themselves.
Yeah.
You're listening to 50 Years Serving the Island, a series showcasing highlights from the Manx Radio archives from the station's first 5 decades as the Isle of Man's public service broadcaster. Today, we're revisiting an edition of the Family Phone-In from 1981, focusing on old-fashioned health remedies, presented by David Callister, whose studio guest is Mona Douglas.
And someone's been on the phone to say the first spit of the morning will cure a wart. What about that one, Mona?
Oh, yes, that's a well-known thing. It's sometimes combined with other things, but it is put into a lot of cures.
And we move on to our next caller, who is Beryl. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning, Beryl.
Good morning. I want to talk about bread poultices. I don't know if your listeners have heard about bread poultices, but when we were young, we used to, anyone who had a boil or a pimple used to have a bread poultice slapped on it.
Oh, yes, that was quite a common thing, but I wouldn't exactly call that an ordinary folk medicine thing. There was no magic about it. It just had, I suppose, the same effect as any other kind of poultice would have.
Yes, and we used to use soap and sugar, too.
Soap and sugar, what did you do with that?
That used to be put on for a poultice, for a septic finger or something.
Yeah.
And that was a marvellous thing with carbolic soap and sugar.
Ah, carbolic soap, yes.
Yes.
That would disinfect it, of course.
Yeah.
Yes, there's just one funny thing. My young brother was about 2 and he had a septic finger.
and we put a bread poultice on and put him to bed. And when he got up in the morning, he'd eaten the poultice.
Oh, that's brilliant.
And did it cure the abscess?
Eventually, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Bye-bye.
Certainly it would have saved him having his breakfast, I dare say. He wouldn't want any porridge that day. What's Audrey got to say? Hello, good morning, Audrey.
Good morning. I just wanted to say that my grandmother always used to use egg white for very bad baby's nappy rash.
Egg white. What did she do?
Oh, yes.
Just rubbed it on the bottom.
Separated the yolk from the egg and rubbed the white into nappy rash.
Yes, that would be very effective because the white of egg is very smooth and soothing, and it would prevent rashes.
And also about the potato, my grandfather always used to carry one in his coat pocket wrapped in another one to the rheumatism. He said it took all the impurities out of the body which went into the potato.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard that about onions. I've also heard that in the bad smallpox epidemic that they had in Douglas in the last century, one house in the middle of a bad district was not affected. Afterwards, they wondered why, and they found that in the house was stored a box of onions which had gone completely black. And it was reckoned that the onions had absorbed the smallpox germs and protected the people in the house.
And also for a bad back, my grandmother always used to iron my grandfather with brown paper.
Iron him.
Yeah, he used to
Yes, I've heard of that too. It used to be for sciatica or lumbago, didn't it?
What did she lay him on the ironing board?
That's right. Put the brown paper on him and then iron.
Oh dear. Well, that's extraordinary. How long ago is that? Is that it has been done in recent times? In the 20s. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no one ironing anybody in your family at the moment, then.
No.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's extraordinary. Have you ever seen anyone being ironed?
Yes, my father.
You haven't. What?
Yes, Mother used to make him lie down in the rug in front of the fire and turn his shirt up and get a hot iron and put brown paper underneath it so he wouldn't get burnt and iron the place where the lumbago was.
Good heavens.
Just back and forward with the iron. Don't suppose she pressed very hard.
I hope it wasn't too hot. Right, moving to Laurie now, I think it is it. Yeah. Hello, Laurie.
Hello.
Go on.
I'm talking about penicillin. In the past, the Welsh people used to rub wounds with mouldy cheese, which used to cure the septic, of course.
Yes, well, of course, that's obvious, isn't it?
That
It's the
one's
same
obvious.
thing.
But can you tell me how draw out for boils and abscesses, glycerine on a cabbage leaf? Have you heard that one?
No, not glycerine on a cabbage leaf.
Glycerine on a cabbage leaf and bound over the boil or the abscess will dry it out.
What I have heard a lot about is poultice made of hemlock leaves and bound over the abscess.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be very effective.
Yeah, but-
I haven't heard of the cabbage, but cabbage was used for quite a lot of things, including stomach troubles.
Yeah.
White cabbage especially, if you boiled white cabbage and ate it by itself without any other food, did that for a couple of days, it's supposed to be able to cure any stomach trouble.
Oh, because cabbage is very good for you, we know that. So I can understand that, if it's taken internally, but I don't understand how it works from the outside.
Well, any poultice will
Yeah.
draw an abscess, of course,
That's
and
right, yeah.
there must be some special ingredient or property in the hemlock or whatever that cabbage perhaps
Yeah.
that does
some
helps
dry,
to do
some
the job.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they used to use cobwebs for binding wounds to stop the bleeding.
Yes,
Cobwebs.
Binding them with cobwebs.
yes. Well, they're supposed to be very astringent. I should think
Yeah.
they are too.
Right,
Yeah.
thank you very much
Right.
for calling.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just a word on hemlock. It's a thing you wouldn't dare take, Mona, isn't it? I mean, it's deadly poison, isn't it? If you took it, if you drank it or ate it.
Yes.
It's only applied.
Yes,
yeah.
but it may have drawing properties.
Yeah. Well, now, I'm
Another
just...
thing was comfrey. They used to use comfrey leaves.
Yes, now that is supposed to have repaired aches and pains and bruises and what have
It's
you.
very healing.
You're listening to the Family Phone-In. We're talking about the old-fashioned cures. With me is Mona Douglas in the studio, and on our next line is Dorothy. Hello, good morning.
Good morning. I had the fire taken out of a burn by charm. I stuck the back of my hand when I was serving it, not looking what I was doing, dropped my hand into a rice pudding, which was just out of an oven, and it stuck all in between my fingers. And the charm was put on this and taken, the fire was all taken out of it. And I didn't suffer any pain with it.
Who did that for you?
Well, the lady has died about 4 years ago. She was a very old Manx lady. Well, she wasn't old then, but she was in her 80s when she died.
How bad would that burn have been if she hadn't been around, do you think?
Well, it would have been pretty bad because it was all in between the fingers, so it would have all blistered and that. But I had no pain at all with it.
Did she do anything? Did she stroke the hand?
No,
with
she
the
wasn't in
fingers or
contact with me. We just phoned her because she was.
It must
she
have
was
been
a
just
very-
a charm then.
No, she actually just went into a room on her own.
Yes.
She could also stop bleeding, which again I had seen her do. She did it on her own arm when she
Not many
fell.
women could do that.
It was a man's prerogative to stop
Generally.
bleeding, was it?
Yes, well, it passed on mother to son.
Yes, I
And
know.
then
Man to
passed
woman,
back to
woman
his
to man.
sister. But before she died, I believe she passed it on to her brother,
Yes.
and he passed it back to the daughter because
Yes,
she
that
didn't
should
have
be
any
the way.
sons. But it had to pass on male to female.
Yes, it has to.
Anyway, I bet you were mighty glad she was around at the time, eh?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay, thanks very much, Dorothy.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right, our next caller is coming up on line 4. Shall we have line 4? Yes, it's Anne on line 4.
Mine is back to warts again, and I haven't heard anyone mention the buying of warts. And this is something I seem to be able to do. I have done once or twice before.
Buying?
I had a school friend, and she had them all over her hand, you know, and I don't know where I heard this from. And I said to her, well, I'll buy them for a penny. And they went. And the trouble was, for weeks and weeks, I was waiting for me to get them. And then years later, when my husband was in the army, we travelled all over the world. And now I can understand psychologically that these things work, and herbs work, and so on. But whenever we said we were from the Isle of Man, everyone said, oh yes, that's where they have the fairy bridge, you know, and laughed like anything. And one of my husband's cooks was his hands were covered in warts. And he had even been to specialists and hospitals and so forth. And I did the same with him. You know, I said, well, I'll buy them for a halfpenny, I think it was then.
Has the price gone up with inflation?
No, they were a halfpenny then, they're the old halfpenny. And they absolutely disappeared. And when he went back to the hospital for his next checkup, they couldn't believe it. I mean, he'd never heard such rubbish in his life. I mean, you know, that I would give him a halfpenny for these warts. And he, you know, I mean, he just said, that's absolutely ridiculous.
Have you heard of this, Mona? Have you ever heard of it?
No, I haven't heard of buying warts or any other kind of disease, but what it does remind me of is the old Welsh belief in the sin eater, that anyone who had lived a very bad life, there was a man who would take the sins on himself, and he had to be fed a certain kind of meal. I think it was porridge or something like that. And he was supposed to eat the sin with the meal, and of course he was paid for his trouble.
I see.
Yeah, now I've read a story about that, and you know it's revolting because that meal was supposed to be eaten from the dead body. I mean, the body was sort of laid out.
And the meal put on top
What?
of
And the meal put
Yes.
on top of the body.
Oh,
and,
no, you're not eating the body?
No, putting the meal on the body, and you would eat the meal. The family
Yes.
would pay you. Oh, that's really...
Yes, yes.
But I think
it's rather revolting, but it
It is.
of the same type of thing.
I wouldn't like to think...
Oh, no, well, it's nothing like as serious.
No,
of course.
but it seems to work. It's most peculiar, and especially from someone who wasn't Manx and thought it was an absolute load of rubbish, you know,
Yeah.
and it did work. It worked within 2 weeks. Every one of them went.
Right. Well, look, it's interesting. We'd like to talk to you for a long time. We've got a lot of callers waiting, so thank you very
Okay.
much, Anne, okay?
Bye.
Bye-bye. That leads us to our next caller, because I did ask for somebody a little bit earlier on if they could tell us if comfrey's still in use. I think we may have an answer now on that from Susan. Good morning.
If I use Comfrey, I've used it for eczema on my legs. I've had eczema for about 3 years on my legs.
Who put you on to using comfrey?
I read about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read about it. In fact, I read about it in 3 books in 1 week, and I bumped into somebody who had some, and that convinced me, and the next week I made some. And I've stopped-
Tell us the procedure and what you did and how you prepared it and so on.
I bought dried Comfrey for the first batch at the health shop in Port Erin,
Yeah.
and I heated that with a giant-sized cheap container of Vaseline, and I kept it for about 4 or 5 days by the fire in a metal tin until the Vaseline had turned dark green. Then I strained it, and I used the Vaseline, which is now green, as an ointment. and it's worked. It's certainly worked as well as any of the doctor's ointments.
I know an ex-nurse living near Ramsey who makes comfrey ointment in that way and sells it, and it's supposed to be very effective.
Yeah, I'm very pleased with it. It's the first time I've made it and used it. I'm using fresh comfrey now to make it, and I use the
fresh from the fields, do you mean?
Well, yes, actually, it grows along by the railway line, which will be a bit sooty, but it's the nearest place I found it.
Yeah.
Yes, it's better with fresh leaves.
Yeah, I bandage them round. I've got a 4-year-old, and every time she falls over and breaks her knees, I bandage a comfrey leaf on.
Yes, it's very healing.
It seems to do, yeah, heals up very quick for her, but I mean, children do anyway. Yeah, I've enjoyed using comfrey. It certainly makes a change from pills and ointments.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure
nice.
It saves the country a lot of money.
I'm sure it does. It's nice to see that these traditions are being carried on. We're looking, we thought rather this morning, at something that was dying out, but certainly you, Susan, are carrying it on.
Oh yes, I think a lot of people will.
Yes, I think I agree with you. I know a lot of people that still believe in these things and find them effective.
Yeah, they work.
Okay,
comfrey
thank you.
was also used for toothache.
Was
An
it?
abscess on the tooth to draw it out, a poultice of comfrey.
On the cheek.
But
Was it?
they always had a drastic cure for that too, because if the poultice didn't work, they went to the local blacksmith and he pulled the tooth out without an anaesthetic.
Oh, that's great, isn't it? We're laughing about it. I don't think we'd have enjoyed it happening to us. Okay, thanks, Susan.
Right, bye.
Bye-bye. Yes, the blacksmith as dentist. Well, now, we haven't had any greetings in Manxfrey this morning so far, Mona, but I'm sure we'll get one now from Bernard Kane. Bernard.
Hello, David. Good morning.
Morning.
A couple of points from what you've been talking about warts now. The current sort of medical folklore about warts seems to be this, that they are essentially a sort of surface thing, and they're caused by a virus, and the virus doesn't actually get into the bloodstream of the body, and so the body's antibody producing system isn't stimulated. And the theory is that when you sort of disturb a wart in some way by rubbing it or whatever, eventually some of the virus will get into the body's system, which will then start producing antibodies against the virus, and so you effectively cure the wart yourself. Now, this, as I say, is the medical folklore about it, but I've come across 2 instances of sort of folk cures which my children have used and have got rid of rather nasty warts on the hands. Going to another point about how these things sometimes die out. As you say, they were passed on sometimes from a man to a woman and so on, but they were usually only passed on the deathbed. And there's a story I heard of a man who had apparently a number of charms, and after he died, his wife was asked why she didn't get the charm from him. And she said, well, we would have asked him, but we didn't want him to think we thought he was dying.
Thank you very much indeed.
Another point, if I may just...
well, very quickly, because I have 3 callers waiting, Bernie, with 3 minutes left. Okay.
I have a doctor friend who worked in Northern Ireland, and he told me once of a case of a man who had an obstructed gut. And when he was operated on, he was found to have several reeds, long reeds, all tangled up inside him. And apparently a local sort of fairy doctor had told him to go at night and pick a reed from a marsh and eat the thing whole as a cure for some ailment or other. And he'd done this on several occasions and finished up with an obstruction in his gut.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to be a bit cautious about some of these things.
Okay, thanks very much, Bernie. Okay, bye-bye. Bye. And our final caller this morning will be Joan. Hello, Joan.
Has Mona heard about the people that's suffering with boils going to farms in the district? This is going back about 20 years or so, 30 years probably, going to the local farm, waiting for a cow to flop onto where the boil was, and then binding it up.
Flop? Can you explain flop?
Cow dog.
Absolutely, yes. And it completely cured. I saw some very bad boils on one gentleman. Came at milking time, stood there with them. They're on his shoulder and his top of his arm, and stood under the cow when he saw it was going to happen. And they were completely cured and no disfigurement for 3 days.
Well, that's a nice note on which to finish, just at lunchtime. Thank you very much indeed. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
David Callister and his guest Mona Douglas there, with an edition of the Family Phone-In, which was broadcast in 1981. And you can hear that programme in full and additional content from the Manx Radio archives online at manxradio.com/portal.